His response was that we certainly don't oppose interracial marriage, which he should have stopped, quite frankly, right there. He then tried to go a bit further and said, we're also not opposed to mixed marriage. It's just, if you will, a desire to keep the faith going, and that's natural, but there's no opposition to it. Now, the problem with this statement wasn't true. In other words, that Imus's question was, doesn't Jewish law oppose mixed marriage? Lieberman could have offered any of a number of answers, but without question, each of those are problematical. And in essence, given the place of Jews in American society, without question, there is a contradiction between integration and integration on one hand, survival and distinctiveness on the other hand. My answer to you, having affirmed your question, then is twofold. Number one is that the real problem right now is not America. The real problem is the Jewish community. Therefore, what I've suggested is, and certainly the American Jewish Committee has accepted this as a policy statement, is that we are making three very simple conclusions, three very simple statements that should be intuitive and obvious, and these are things that we strongly believe in. One is marriage between Jew and Jew is ideal. When a mixed marriage occurs, two, the best solution, the best outcome is the conversion of a non-Jewish spouse. Three, when conversion is not in immediate cards, it is of critical importance to raise children exclusively in one faith and not in two, or for that matter, in none. Now, those three propositions are relatively uncontroversial, and so I say there is a consensus, if you will, that could be articulated. Whether we reach it or not is something else. But there is a consensus, and the first comment is that of within the Jewish community, that consensus does not exist. So that's the first obstacle. In the broader society, here the real change in America really is what I spoke about earlier, namely, what is a real multiculturalism? A real multiculturalism does mean the distinctiveness of the Jewish culture is an asset for America as a multicultural society. And preserving that distinctiveness is best realized within Jewish in-marriage. So my real answer to you is, halavai, we should get to the point that that's a problem. In other words, that the real problem right now is inside the Jewish community.
This I agree, but you're asking for a campaign, right? What you're saying is like we started the birthright, we had Soviet Jewry, we had Israel, and all these things united us. We had a consensus. Now imagine if we start a campaign, or American Jewry starts such a campaign, and say we oppose mixed marriages. This is dangerous. The Jewish people is going to.
Well, again, I said there were three components to it. In other words, it's not simply one statement. One statement alone, you may very well be correct. I have a great deal of faith in the process, a great deal of faith in America, in the fairness of American society. A campaign to enhance Judaic distinctiveness that says what we are about, and not as opposed to what we are opposed and what we're against. That campaign, I tend to think, would have a great deal of resonance in an America that really values distinctiveness. Jonathan Sarna, the historian of American Judaism, puts it very, very well. He's very much a part of the kinds of deliberations that I've been heading up. His argument is that you'd be surprised in America today how valued countercultural messages really are. Now, that's not to say it won't come without some tension and friction. That's why I say ultimately we may be forced to choose between integration and distinctiveness. We prefer not to choose, without question. Having said that, though, Shmuel, I guess what I find the lack of realism on your part is that right now the degree of integration of Jews into American society is so great that the chances of retreating from that, or a backlash, I think are remote. Now, obviously, nothing is without risk, nothing is without problems, but in the balance between integration and distinctiveness, right now the entire balance is on integration. We can withstand a bit more distinctiveness.
Easy.
I think, like everybody else here, we enjoyed this address enormously and had a lot of profundity that we'll all absorb and identify with. But I would like to posit, if I may, be a little even more pessimistic than you are. And I would say on three levels. First of all, in terms of Jewish leadership, the type of Jewish leadership that you're talking, not only in America, but throughout the world today, is no longer the leadership which will respond in this way. The leadership and the nature, particularly of lay leadership, is not one that would respond to anything that could conflict with the individual and the personal. The second factor is that I think that despite what you say, the ethos of American liberalism, in a sense, is infinitely superior to any other factor. And that ethos of American liberalism does consider intermarriage as racist. And I must say, although I'm not consider myself today as a liberal, I must say that I have a lot of sympathy towards. Because if you're not religious, and if you don't have some other factor motivating you, in the context of a society which is where there is intermarriage between all other groups, to be distinctive in that way would be to go beyond it. And the third pessimistic factor that I would like to bring towards you is something that shocked me. I've always said that the way to answer the issue of intermarriage, as you say, Jewish heritage and Jewish heritage. But I've seen statistics that have shocked me, particularly before I made Aliyah and left Australia. The Jewish day school movement in Australia was a very powerful movement. What shocked me was that the graduates of the Jewish day schools and those that had a less Jewish education, there were differences. But the differences, when boy meets girl and they're not observant in some form to a religious way of life as distinct from ideology, the difference is marginal.
Okay, look, those are telling comments, Ms. Liebler, and it's very difficult to disagree because I think in many ways they do address reality. But to work in reverse order, first of all, as far as Jewish education is concerned, there is an enormous challenge that is ultimately doable, and that is break the norm that Jewish education ends at bar bat mitzvah. In other words, if you want to find out who is not marrying out, take a look at people in their adolescence. People going to day schools during their high school years are least likely to marry out. Brandeis University puts it very well in one of their studies. Take an adolescent and ask, who are their three closest friends? Three closest friends, Jews. The odds on an in-marriage are astronomical. 2 out of 3, quite good. 1 out of 3, possible but not likely. None out of 3, virtually a guarantee of out-marriage. So policy solution seems obvious, namely that during the adolescent years, when they are most open and receptive to hearing about a relatively bookish intellectual culture such as Judaism, we're losing them. So in that sense, the third element of what you're saying, I find to be in many ways the most sanguine, namely that a greater emphasis upon the Jewish continuity agenda would translate into breaking the norm of Jewish education as ceasing at bar bat mitzvah. Your issues of liberalism, your second point, I don't really disagree. The liberal ethos is an egalitarian ethos. Here again, Jonathan Sarnas tried to argue that an American multicultural ethos, which is a distinctively liberal ethos, say would promote marriages between African Americans and African Americans. Does American society reject that? Certainly African American leadership does not reject it by any stretch of the imagination. Sure, it'd be better in terms of American egalitarianism and American inclusivity to encourage marriages between blacks and whites. However, black leadership is quite literally, as we speak, regarding the black home as the critical arena that needs to be addressed. And in that sense, while I accept all of what you're saying about a liberal ethos of egalitarianism that needs to be engaged, and I tend to be somewhat pessimistic myself on it, I don't think it's entirely out of the question. As far as your first point that opposition to mixed marriage only makes sense within religious frameworks, the issue for today is Jewish peoplehood, ties between Jews. The phenomenon of mixed marriage is corrosive of peoplehood. Jewish leadership, you're quite correct, will not sign on to religious arguments on which we are sorely divided. They will acknowledge that the weaknesses of peoplehood are probably best expressed today. The bonds of peoplehood have been badly frayed and continue to be frayed by the incidence of mixed marriage. So look, my real comment is that I don't really disagree with your skepticism, if I can change pessimism to skepticism. What I am convinced on, by the way, is that if the Jews don't articulate the message of in marriage, no one else is going to do it for them. So that really is up to us. American culture, American television, media, they think mixed marriage is American as apple pie. If you take one of the worst movies in recent years, it's so bad I forget its name, but it's a well-known movie about Meet the Fockers, that's what it is, about meeting some in-laws. In an absolutely terrible movie, the most memorable line is the last scene, where after there's been this enormous conflict between two sets of in-laws, the Jewish side of the family arranges the marriage. Everyone is having this wonderful reconciliation. And without batting an eyelash, it is perfectly normal that a rabbi is officiating. In other words, this is seen as being the American norm. You know, this is the way of providing a happy ending to what has been a very turbulent movie. So American culture is giving us a totally opposite message. Only the Jews can articulate a distinctive counter message.
Avner?
Well, I want to join Mr. Lieber in congratulating you on a very interesting lecture, well arranged, well delivered. I have a question, though, in that the problem is not only social, as you yourself mentioned, but also psychological. And to me, the issue of intermarriage or mixed marriage may be something of a red herring, in the sense that what seems to be the most crucial question is what it means for American Jews or Jewish Americans, which is another way of putting it depending on where you put the emphasis, to be Jewish, as opposed to, for example, what it means to us Israeli Jews, where being Jewish is extremely important, where we speak of the Jewish people as if it was something taken for granted, whereas if you question Jews around the world, they will not necessarily say we are members of the Jewish people. They may say we are Americans, Argentinians, French with Jewish religion. So my question to you is whether, in fact, the importance and meaning of being Jewish to American Jews is dwindling, is becoming less, and that with time, sad as it may be, that it will go down, and that there will be, if you like, fewer American Jews or fewer Americans for whom Jewishness is that important.
Okay, three very quick comments, but three very quick observations. Number one, as far as intermarriage itself is that the core of the problem, or is that simply a reflection of a larger phenomenon, a larger problem that is much more deeply rooted? The answer is yes and no. On the one hand, you're quite correct. On the other hand, intermarriage itself is not just symptomatic of the problem, it's also causative. Namely, what happens in the second generation, what happens in the third generation. In other words, those who are marrying out today are not stopping to be Jewish. They say, we're Jewish, but this is what it means. The question is, what impact will that have in the second and third? And more importantly, what impact will it have on the broader Jewish American culture? In other words, we reach a point of saying, intermarriage is okay, in marriage is okay. It's half of one, half six of one, half a dozen of another. If we reach that point, then your pessimistic conclusion is far more salient. My comment then is that I'd rather not reach that point. In other words, that the first statement to be made, in other words, is that intermarriage itself is not a red herring, because it is both symptomatic and causative at the same time. Second comment is that I'd suggest that the issues, you're quite correct, are both sociological and psychological in terms of how Jews feel about their Jewishness. But there's also, it's related really to the first theme, there's also at the core of this a cultural dilemma of what do we think about mixed marriage? What is our cultural value? What is our ideology? Now again, this cultural value was never in question any time before the late 20th century. It was very clear as to what our cultural value was. That meant that it was clear what we were teaching, what messages we were transmitting from one generation to another. There were always people who didn't live by these messages, of whom it didn't work, but at least the messages were there. So my second theme, if you will, is that the question we confront today is less a debate about, well, do we invest in day schools or do we invest in outreach programs to mixed parents? First of all, there's probably room for both. And secondly, those are tactical questions. Behind it, though, is the ideological question about what do we value. My suggestion to you is that right now we've become sorely ambivalent, sorely conflicted as to what it is we value. Thirdly, if there is a point of consensus here, it's what I said before to Izzy Liebler, is that American Jewish leaders, certainly, and again, my lecture really was focused on what should leadership be saying and doing, and not about what's happening in the street is relevant, but I wasn't being anywhere near as prescriptive in terms of that. If we're talking about the challenge to Jewish leadership here, what is fraying in terms of you saying, well, how do Jews feel about their Jewishness? Their feelings about Jewishness on a personal level probably are not declining all that much. In other words, that they still feel Jewish. I'm not quite sure what that means, but they'll tell you, I'm still Jewish. What they won't tell you, and here is the real challenge to the broader culture and to leadership, what they won't tell you is that my ties to the Jewish people are particularly strong. In that sense, intermarriage is far from being a red herring. It is a perfect expression of this fraying of the bonds of peoplehood. I would think that our challenge for the 21st century is precisely providing that collective Jewish will, that this something about this collective Jewish enterprise that I continue to want to be a part of. That to me is a message leadership needs to articulate. I don't think we would exclude, we shouldn't exclude, those who want to share the message and have a Gentile spouse. But what we should be doing is saying, what does it mean to be part of this enterprise? It doesn't mean a vague sense of Jewishness. Good luck to you if you feel that way. But what we really want you for is to be part of the collective Jewish will. So in that sense, again, I don't think it's a red herring by any stretch of the imagination.
We have now so many questions that can we group them by threes?
Absolutely.
So I have first Dr. Ephraim Zorov, then Dr. Dov Paris, then Meir Romeim in this first round. And then I have quite a few more people for the second round. Ephraim.
Obviously, he gave us a lot of food for thought, Steve, and for that we're thankful. I want to, I mean, it's clear that this is the question, really, for the Jewish people in this century. And in that respect, we have to take it very seriously because, as you presented, and we all know, the situation is quite serious. I just have one comment and two quick questions. One of the things that has to be dealt with is really, you spoke a lot about leadership, you focused on leadership, but the question is, who are these leaders? And that's really the issue, because in the past, I think it's fair to say that Jewish leadership was based on commitment, observance, etc. And one of the characteristics of Jewish leadership in the modern era is that there are two other characteristics. One is money, in other words, the ability to support, financially support Jewish endeavors, and the other is political power. So in other words, individuals who have little sense of affiliation but are willing to support Jewish endeavors, or people who have achieved prominence and have very little sense of Jewish affiliation, have become, in a sense, Jewish leaders. They, I think, set a very bad example, many of them, in other words, in terms of continuity. This is a major issue that has to be dealt with, because how can Jewish organizations come out against intermarriage when significant numbers of their board members are intermarried? And even if I look at my own institution, in other words, the professionals are all obviously very committed Jews. Not obviously, they're all very committed Jews. But the people who make a lot of the decisions, it would be hard to characterize them as very committed Jews. So this is certainly a problem. The questions are the following. One of the issues that has come up in the past, and Jack Wertheim is one of the people who have articulated it, is whether or not it's even worthwhile to spend resources on trying to bring in people who are almost certainly lost to the Jewish people. Maybe it's better to concentrate our resources on the core Jewish population who want to be Jewish and try and ensure that they and their children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren remain Jewish. So that's one question I'd like you to address. And the other thing is, when you mention outreach organizations, which ones are you referring to? In other words, there's very different types of outreach organizations. There's from Orthodox outreach to people reaching out to intermarried couples.
Dolph?
Thank you very much for your excellent talk and enlightening talk. I would like to ask a question about practical policy regarding the issues. Today's newspaper reports about a group of hundreds of Jewish singles from the age of 25 to 45 who come to Israel in an attempt to get shidduchim here. Now, 35 years ago, as a graduate student in the United States, I observed that even kids who came from day schools to college, to residential colleges, would shed their yarmulke within few months from coming to college. That is, they were courageous enough to wear a yarmulke on campus, but by the first midterm, the pressure of the exams was such that they stopped coming to synagogue and gradually shed their yarmulke, etc., etc. Now, I suggested then to the local community to implement a program whereby local Jewish families would invite with hospitality on Shabbat meals for Jewish students on campus who are out of home. This would encourage better connections and networking in the Jewish community at large, would benefit both the students and the hosting families. Now, this idea met with ridicule. I wonder whether today such idea would catch.
Thank you first for your excellent presentation. Secondly, I would like to exaggerate a little bit. I would like to exaggerate because I consider the issue as maybe the most important issue of American Jewry. Because I remember 55 years ago that there were more than 5 million Jews in the United States. Today, how many do we have? About 6 million? Less than 6 million. So it's a matter of survival. And I consider it as a matter of survival. It's a matter of an emergency. So maybe the American Jewry need a great leader who will speak explicitly, someone like Ben-Gurion that will tell them the truth, that this is a matter of survival. And American Jewry may disappear if this trend continues, because what is the percentage of intermarriages today? Is it still about 50-60%, right?
50%, 47%.
50%. So it's a matter of survival. And I think we should put it in this way. So what is your opinion? Thanks.
Okay, perhaps I can take these in reverse order. First of all, the last set of issues raised by Mayor, I'm sorry, I didn't catch
Mayor, yes, Mayor Omer.
Mayor Ribbon. In terms of what is survival, I think we basically have two problems that needs to be, again, confronted honestly here. Namely that the bottom line is that these are private decisions that people are making, and the capacity of the public sector to impact upon private decision making is certainly problematical, certainly in the name of survival. What I've suggested is that what we can and should be doing is creating a climate in which when people are making their private decisions, they'll at the very least know what the climate's about. Again, it goes back to Shoshana Cardin's comments that I can't guarantee what my children will do, but I can guarantee that they'll know what I think about it. Now, so in that sense, the challenge, I've suggested